This video interview has been dedicated by Mr. Asher Brenner in memory of his grandfather, Nathanael ben Yaakov. Many Jews today feel the need for a Jewish renaissance. People are searching for a more vital and authentic mode of Jewish expression, and more than ever we need to shift not only physically, but spiritually out of exile mode. This is Torah Nation TV from Jerusalem, and we are speaking with the head of Machon Shilo, Rabbi David Bar-Hayim. Shalom, Rabbi Bar-Hayim.
Shalom.
We see often that minyanim omit the recitation of Tachanun. Is this an acceptable practice?
That's a very interesting question, because we find two approaches amongst the Posakim regarding this matter of Tachanun, or as it is known in the Talmud and in the Rishonim as Nefilat Apayim, which literally means falling on the face. In other words, prostrating oneself before Hashem and supplicating to Him whilst in a position of prostration on the ground or in a position of semi-reclining. This practice of Nefilat Apayim is mentioned in the Talmud, but there is no clear indication whatever in the Talmud that it is a requirement. What is more likely is that it is an ancient custom, but not a requirement. So let us begin at the beginning. Who are those Posakim who claim that Nefilat Apayim is a Hova, is a requirement? So it seems from the words of Saadia Gaon, and even more explicitly and unequivocally the words of the Rambam teach us that Nefilat Apayim is a requirement, is a Hova. Rambam speaks of 8 actions or issues that a person must remember to do as part of his tefillah, and one of those is Hishtahawaya, which means bowing down or prostrating oneself before Hashem. And Rambam describes this as being a part of the tefillah, that is to say, as it were, an extension of the tefillah, something that one does immediately after the Shemona Esrei, and is in fact considered the ending of the experience or the miswa of tefillah, of praying to Hashem. And this miswa, as it is described by Rabbi Saadia Gaon, also by Rabbi Amram Gaon in his Sidur, Rabbi Amram Gaon does not state explicitly if it's a Hova or not, but he states that this is what is done. Rabbi Saadia Gaon and Rambam, as I say, are more explicit that it is required. They describe it as a person either lying down, face down on the floor, or in a semi-reclining position, a little bit above the floor, or leaning over in a sitting position, so that is one is semi-reclining, and saying before Hashem any words of supplication and prayer that a person is moved to say. In other words, a person can say 1 or 2 or 3 parakim from Tehillim, or a collection of Pesukim from the Tanakh, from Tehillim and other places in the Tanakh. Likewise, a person can make his own tefillah, his own supplication in his own words, in whatever language he is proficient at. And also one can read the text which appears in a Sidur, in different Sidurim, based on different customs, different Nushaoth, Nusach Sfaradim or Ashkenaz or Temanim. One will find different versions of Nefilat Apayim, because there is no set text, and these are all matter of custom, of minhag, which pesukim and which text one can recite. There are other Rishonim and Geonim, in fact, who explicitly state that Nefilat Apayim is Reshuth. In other words, it is not a requirement, it is not a halacha, it is a minhag, it is a custom. And one is not required always at all costs to say Nefilat Apayim. This is quoted in the name of by Rabbi Yitzchak ibn Giat, one of the early Rishonim, in the name of Rav Sel Shalom Gaon. This is quoted by the two in the name of Rav Natunai Gaon, and others who claim that this is a minhag, although a very ancient minhag, but not a requirement. We see in the Talmud that this custom was known, it was practiced, but nowhere is there any indication in the works of Hazal, in the Mishnah, and the Gemara, that this custom known as Nefilat Apayim is a requirement, or that it is connected even to the tefillah necessarily, as Rambam claims. We have the well-known story in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Bava Mesi'ah Daf Nun Tet, where the wife of Rabbi Eliezer wishes to prevent him doing Nefilat Apayim, supplicating before Hashem, because she suspected that he would complain to Hashem in his prayers about the behavior of her brother Rabban Gamliel towards Rabbi Eliezer, who had, in his view, in the view of Rabbi Eliezer, Rabban Gamliel had acted improperly towards him, and she feared that he would pray to Hashem in such a way that this would bring retribution, divine retribution, on the head of Rabban Gamliel. In order to protect her brother, the Gemara tells us, she distracted Rabbi Eliezer from saying Nefilat Apayim. If it were the case that this was an absolute requirement, then it is clear that nothing would have prevented him from doing so, and she could not have distracted him from doing so, and he wouldn't have been so easily distracted and forgotten about it. But if it's a minhag which can or cannot be done, may not be done, then it is much more readily understood. We have another story, another incident mentioned in the Talmud Bavli, Masechet Megillah Daf Kaf Bet, where Rav is described as having come to Bavel. He came to Bavel from Eretz Yisrael, as we know, and when the congregation fell down on their faces when they did Nefilat Apayim, he did not follow suit, and the Gemara discusses why and explains. We don't have to go into the details now, but the upshot of that discussion in Masechet Megillah is that Rav did not feel compelled to do Nefilat Apayim at that point in time, whereas if it was an absolute requirement, he certainly would have been required to do so, and he would have found a way to make it possible for him to do so, and the different reasons mentioned by the Gemara would not have prevented him from doing so. And this is the more reasonable and more correct approach based on the sources, as is described and summed up very nicely and clearly by the Rivash in his famous Teshuvah on the subject, Siman Tal Yod Bet, where he concludes that Nefilat Apayim is a custom, a very ancient custom, but not a requirement. And therefore, a person may, if davening, when davening by himself, a person may either choose to do so, or may, on the other hand, prefer not to do so. It all depends on the situation, and there may be considerations, there may be reasons in certain situations why a person may feel that it's better that he not do so now. For instance, if he knows people are waiting for him, he's in a rush to get somewhere, then he doesn't have to do Nefilat Apayim because it is Reshut.
And what if a minyan? Is the congregation required to say Nefilat Apayim?
Again, seeing that this is an ancient custom, mentioned already from in the days of the Mishnah, and even prior to that, normally an ancient custom should be maintained. And that is why the general rule is that where we have a minyan, we also have Nefilat Apayim. It is also true that according to different views, different customs, there are certain days during the year, and this is true according to everyone, even according to the Rambam, who is the most staunch and most insistent upon the fact that Nefilat Apayim is a chovah, is a requirement. There are days when, according to all, we do not say Nefilat Apayim, such as Shabbat, Yom Tov, and Erev Shabbat, Minha, and the same is true for Erev Yom Tov and Hanukkah, Purim, etc. It is also true that there are beyond those days that we just mentioned, there are other days, such as the entire month of Nisan, for example, which is a minhag mentioned in Masechet Soferim, also a fairly ancient source, which can be traced back to Eretz Israel. And this is the general practice nowadays, even though the Rambam does not mention it, for example, of not saying Nefilat HaPayim during the entire month of Nisan. There are also other days which have been added to this list of days when it is common practice not to say Nefilat HaPayim, days which have been added in much more recent times, such as Lag BaOmer, for example. Is it proper for a tzibur not to say Nefilat HaPayim on the days we just mentioned? The answer, briefly, in a nutshell, is yes, because we just explained that Nefilat HaPayim is Rashuth, and if there is a valid reason and the tzibur is agreed that they should not say Nefilat HaPayim on this day or that day, with some valid reason, then yes, they do not have to say Nefilat HaPayim on such a day. Certainly on days of simcha, of rejoicing, of thanksgiving, it does not make sense to say Nefilat HaPayim in a public setting. In a private setting, as an individual practice, a person may do so, but the tzibur should refrain from expressions of supplication and crying and weeping, etc., which are often associated with Nefilat HaPayim, and if it's done seriously. The tzibur should refrain from doing these things on days which are defined as happy, joyous days. That is why all of Am Yisrael doesn't say Nefilat HaPayim, for example, on Hanukkah, etc. So it is possible for a tzibur to decide that we are not going to say Nefilat HaPayim on certain days. On the other hand, we see that in certain communities it is quite common to see that essentially they never say Tachanun, because they will always tell you that today is the yahrzeit of such and such a Rabbi or such a tzaddik, and they seem to have an endless list of Rabbis and tzaddikim, and they know exactly on which day they passed away, and they can always somehow claim that this is therefore a happy day according to a particular way of viewing these things, that the day of the leaving from this world of a tzaddik or of a Rebbe is somehow a happy occasion, which is itself a somewhat dubious approach and claim, but nevertheless that is their claim, and based on that claim they very rarely, if ever, say Tachanun. This strikes me as disingenuous. It's clear that essentially what we see here is a decision. We could call it a vox populi, the common voice of the people, the tzibur, making it known that their wish is not to say Tachanun, not to say Nefilat HaPayim. They really are looking for a way out of it. And the different Yemei Hilula and Yortzites, etc., are really just an excuse. And this is something which is perhaps not so proper. Although technically one could justify it, as we said before, if it's only a minhag, it's reshuth, then one does not have to do it in the first place, and that is also true. But in conclusion, I would like to stress that even though it is clearly a minhag and reshuth and not a hovah, nevertheless it is a very positive practice, and it should be encouraged and done where possible and where feasible. And this is because the practice of Tachanun, of Nefilat HaPayim, if one thinks about it, is actually, as it were, taking a leaf out of the book of the teachings of Rabbi Nachman in Breslov, who made a point of stressing the importance of Hidbodadut and Tehina and Tefillah Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, praying to Hashem in one's own words, in a less formalized manner, not during the Shmoneh Esrei, not during the obligatory formalized prayers, but in a more informal and ad-lib kind of way. And that is exactly what Nefilat HaPayim and Tachanun is all about, in fact. So one could say, tongue-in-cheek, that Hazal were Breslovers. In other words, Hazal definitely felt there was a great purpose and advantage to training people to supplicate, to pray, to speak to Hashem in their own words, in their own time, without any pressure, without any pressure of time, etc. In a congregational setting, that is perhaps little bit more difficult, but certainly when one is alone, or one can do so after the tefillah, or before the tefillah, or any time during the day, to pray to Hashem in one's own words is a very great and important thing, and one of the major ways in which a person can train himself to come closer to Hashem. And Chazal instituted this minhag, at least, if not a chovah, at least a minhag of doing so, and it was always done as the conclusion, as it were, of the tefillah of the Shemoneh Esrei. And there is much to be said for this. There is much spiritual gain to be had from doing so properly, doing so with a full kavanat halev, with a proper intention and purity of the heart and of the mind, and therefore one should not, without proper reason or excuse, one should not avoid Nefilat HaPayim. It is in fact a gift that we should be able to speak to Hashem, both in the words of the Tanakh or in our own words. This is a great gift and a great opportunity, and we should not squander it.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the Rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the Rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.